You're outdated, Caleb. This company doesn't need people who live in the past. The words fell across the glass conference room like a final judgment. Everyone around the table heard them. Everyone saw the quiet single father lower his eyes and slowly close the folder in front of him. But no one knew that the man being dismissed as obsolete was once the person America called when its most critical systems were under threat. Caleb Whitmore had spent years protecting networks, solving problems most people never knew existed, and carrying responsibilities that never appeared on a resume. Now he stood in a modern headquarters beneath bright lights, wearing a simple navy shirt, holding a coffee cup that had gone cold, while the woman across from him decided he no longer belonged. Adeline Mercer, the young and powerful CEO of Mercer Dynamics, looked at the reports on the table with complete confidence. "Your methods are too old-fashioned," she said. "Technology changes every day. We need people who can move forward." Caleb listened quietly. He did not argue. He did not defend his past. He simply nodded and said, "I understand." That answer surprised her more than anger ever could. She expected resistance. She expected excuses. Instead, he accepted the decision with the same calm dignity he had carried for years. Outside the conference room windows, the city moved quickly. Cars passed below. Office workers rushed between buildings. Everyone was chasing something louder, faster, and more impressive. But Caleb had learned long ago that real strength rarely announced itself. Sometimes it simply stood still and waited for the truth to arrive. He gathered the few personal items from his desk afterward. A family photo. A small notebook filled with his daughter Lily's drawings. A worn keychain she had given him on his birthday. To his co-workers, he looked like another employee leaving after a difficult meeting. They did not see the years of sacrifice behind his quiet expression. They did not know that Caleb had chosen a simple life because he wanted his daughter to remember him as a father, not just as a name attached to classified achievements. That evening, Caleb drove home in his older pickup truck through the familiar streets of his neighborhood. Lily ran to the door when he arrived, smiling with the kind of joy no promotion or title could ever replace. "You're home early, Dad." Caleb smiled softly. "Yeah. I am." He never told her about the meeting. He never told her someone had underestimated him. He only helped her with homework, cooked dinner, and listened to her stories about school. Because Caleb Whitmore had never measured his worth by someone else's opinion. But that night, while the quiet street settled under the evening sky, a different kind of attention was beginning to move toward him. A secure phone that had remained silent for years suddenly lit up. A number he thought he would never see again appeared on the screen. Caleb stared at it for a long moment. Then he answered. And the voice on the other end spoke words that would change everything. "Commander Whitmore, we need you back. If this story has you hooked, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. Also, are you Team CEO or Team Single Dad? Let me know in the comments. Now, back to the story. The next morning arrived quietly at Caleb Whitmore's small home on the edge of town. The sunlight slipped through the kitchen window, touching the old wooden table where a father and daughter shared breakfast before the day began. To the outside world, Caleb was simply a man starting over. A single dad with an ordinary routine. A person who fixed computer problems, packed school lunches, and remembered to leave encouraging notes inside his daughter's backpack. But behind that quiet life was a chapter he had spent years trying to close. Years earlier, Caleb had carried a different responsibility. He had worked with some of the most advanced cybersecurity teams in the United States, solving digital threats that required patience, precision, and trust. He had learned that the most important victories were often the ones nobody ever saw. There were no celebrations. No public recognition. Just long nights, difficult decisions, and the knowledge that millions of people could sleep peacefully because someone was watching over the unseen world. But after leaving that life behind, Caleb chose something different. He chose bedtime stories over emergency calls. He chose school events over conference rooms. He chose being present for Lily over chasing a title that most people would never understand. That choice was worth more to him than any award. At Mercer Dynamics, however, people only saw the surface. They saw an employee who preferred careful analysis over rushing into every new trend. They saw someone who questioned whether every new system was truly safer. They saw an older approach in a world obsessed with speed. Adeline Mercer had built her company by making bold decisions, and she believed progress required removing anything that slowed the future. She did not hate Caleb. She simply never took the time to understand him. That was the mistake many powerful people made. They looked at quiet people and assumed there was nothing beneath the silence. They mistook patience for weakness. They confused humility with a lack of ability. Caleb had experienced that misunderstanding before. He knew that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and sometimes it arrived only after people finally saw the truth. That evening, after the mysterious phone call, Caleb sat alone in his kitchen while the house became peaceful. Lily was asleep upstairs, and a small drawing she made was resting beside his coffee. The message from the caller remained on his mind. "Commander Whitmore, we need you back." He had spent years hoping that part of his life was finished. He had built a new identity around being a father, a neighbor, and a man who helped quietly when he could. But some responsibilities never truly disappear. Caleb looked at the family photo on the table and took a slow breath. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know that the same people who had overlooked him would soon discover the value of the man they had dismissed. For now, he simply sat in the silence, carrying the weight of a decision only he could make. Because sometimes the people who walk away from power are the very people the world needs when everything begins to change. At Mercer Dynamics, the morning after Caleb Whitmore left, the atmosphere felt different. The office was brighter, louder, and more confident than ever. Employees walked through the glass halls carrying tablets, discussing new software updates, and celebrating what they believed was a necessary change. To many of them, Caleb's departure was simply another business decision. A quiet employee had been replaced, and the company was moving forward. Adeline Mercer stood in her office overlooking the city skyline, reviewing the latest cybersecurity reports. She believed in progress. She believed in innovation. She believed every decision had to protect the future of the company she had built. "We cannot hold on to old habits just because they are familiar," she told her executive team. "The world changes every day, and we have to change with it." Around the table, people nodded in agreement. Nobody questioned her leadership. Nobody wanted to be the person who challenged the CEO. But hidden inside the newest security reports were small details that almost everyone overlooked. Unusual patterns. Strange activity. Tiny warning signs appearing across multiple systems. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just small cracks that someone with years of experience would notice. Caleb had always been that person. He was the one who looked deeper when everyone else looked faster. He was the one who asked why before asking how. But without him there, the company moved ahead with confidence. The new cybersecurity team was talented, young, and ambitious. They knew the latest technology. They understood modern tools. But experience had a way of seeing what technology sometimes missed. Across town, Caleb spent the afternoon helping Lily prepare a science project for school. He sat beside her at the kitchen table, carefully explaining how curiosity often mattered more than having the perfect answer. "The smartest people are not always the ones who know everything," he told her. "They are the ones who keep learning." Lily smiled and wrote the words down on her project board. She did not know those same words described her father better than anyone else. That evening, Caleb received another message from the secure phone. This time, it was shorter. More urgent. The world he had left behind was moving closer again. He placed the phone on the table and looked toward the hallway where Lily was reading a book before bed. His heart was divided between the promise he made to live a quiet life and the responsibility he once carried. Meanwhile, at Mercer Dynamics, Adeline continued preparing for the company's biggest technology presentation of the year. She believed everything was under control. She believed the future belonged to those willing to leave the past behind. But the future has a way of reminding people that wisdom does not become outdated simply because it becomes quiet. And somewhere beyond the city lights, the people who knew Caleb's real history had already started making preparations. Because when a situation appears that requires more than ordinary skill, the world does not search for the loudest person in the room. It searches for the person who has been quietly ready all along. The secure phone had been silent for years, but now its small screen glowed in the darkness of Caleb Whitmore's kitchen. The message contained only a few words, yet every word carried the weight of a responsibility he thought he had already left behind. "Commander Whitmore, we need you back." Caleb stared at the screen while the quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the room. On the wall beside him was a photograph of Lily smiling beside a school project she had built with his help. That picture represented the life he had chosen. A simple life. A peaceful life. A life where his greatest mission was making sure his daughter felt safe, loved, and supported. But some chapters never truly disappear. They simply wait for the moment they are needed again. Years earlier, Caleb had worked behind layers of security most people never knew existed. He had analyzed complex systems, studied patterns others missed, and helped protect important networks from unseen dangers. He never chased attention. He never wanted recognition. He believed the strongest people were often the ones who could walk away without needing applause. That belief was why he left. That belief was why he became a single father who packed lunches instead of attending classified meetings. But now someone was asking him to return. Caleb picked up the phone and made a call. "I am no longer that person," he said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. "With respect, Caleb, that is exactly why we called you." The words stayed with him after the conversation ended. The next morning, Caleb returned to his normal routine. He made breakfast, helped Lily find her missing school notebook, and listened as she explained a science assignment she was excited about. To her, he was not a former officer. He was not a cybersecurity expert. He was simply Dad. And that was the role he valued most. But across the city, Mercer Dynamics was facing a challenge no one inside the company fully understood yet. The security systems that had replaced Caleb were showing unusual behavior. The new team worked hard, but the problem was becoming more complicated. Adeline Mercer reviewed the reports late into the evening, confident that her team would solve it. She remembered Caleb's warnings during his final meeting. At the time, she believed they came from someone who was afraid of change. Now, those same warnings appeared in front of her on the screen. For the first time, a small doubt entered her mind. Maybe Caleb had not been resisting the future. Maybe he had been protecting it. Meanwhile, Caleb stood outside his home watching the sunset while Lily played in the yard. He knew returning to that world meant reopening a door he had carefully closed. But he also knew something important. True service was not about titles. It was not about recognition. It was about helping when help was needed. And somewhere above the city, preparations were already beginning. The people who knew Caleb Whitmore's history were moving quickly, because when the moment arrived, they would not be searching for someone new. They would be looking for the quiet man who had been ready all along. The city woke beneath a gray morning sky, unaware that something important was about to happen. Inside Mercer Dynamics headquarters, employees moved quickly through the glass corridors, carrying coffee cups and discussing the company's upcoming security presentation. Everything looked normal. Everything felt controlled. But behind the scenes, the systems protecting the company were beginning to show signs that something was wrong. Adeline Mercer stood in her office, studying the latest reports with a serious expression. The confidence she carried so naturally was still there, but something had changed. For the first time in a long time, she was questioning whether she had overlooked something important. The reports contained patterns she had seen before. Not the exact details. Not the full picture. But familiar signs that suggested the situation required a different kind of experience. Experience like Caleb Whitmore's. She remembered the final conversation they had in the conference room. She remembered his calm voice. She remembered how he did not argue when she called his methods outdated. At the time, she believed his silence meant he had nothing more to say. Now, she wondered if his silence meant something else entirely. Meanwhile, Caleb sat at his kitchen table, reviewing information on a secure device while Lily finished her breakfast nearby. He had agreed to provide assistance, but he had not told anyone about it. Not his neighbors. Not his co-workers from the past. Not even Lily. He wanted to protect the peaceful life they had built. The life where he was simply her father. The life where mornings were about school schedules and evenings were about stories before bed. A quiet life had always been his greatest achievement. But sometimes, life asks people to return to the places they left behind. Caleb looked at the information in front of him and recognized the seriousness of the situation. He noticed details others had missed. Small connections. Unusual patterns. Questions hidden between lines of data. It was the same skill that had defined his career years ago. Not speed. Not ego. Understanding. Across the city, Adeline's team continued searching for answers. Young analysts worked around the clock, confident that the latest tools would reveal the solution. But technology could only go so far. Some problems required patience. Some required perspective. And some required someone who had spent years learning how to see what others could not. Late that afternoon, Adeline received a call that changed the atmosphere inside the building. The voice on the other end was serious. "We need to speak with someone who has handled situations like this before." She looked at the employee records on her screen. Her eyes stopped on one name. Caleb Whitmore. The same man she had dismissed days earlier. The same man she thought belonged to the past. Outside headquarters, the sound of approaching aircraft soon filled the air. Employees stepped toward the windows, watching in confusion as several official helicopters moved toward the building. The entire office slowed. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. Nobody understood why they were there. Then a message reached the executive floor. They were not looking for the CEO. They were not looking for a new technology expert. They were looking for one person. Caleb Whitmore. And in that moment, Adeline realized the quiet analyst she had underestimated was never outdated. He was simply waiting for the world to need him again. The sound of the helicopters changed everything inside Mercer Dynamics. Moments earlier, the building had been filled with ordinary conversations, keyboard sounds, and the quiet rhythm of a company moving through another busy day. Now every person near the windows stood frozen, watching the unexpected arrival outside. Adeline Mercer walked toward the glass with a feeling she could not explain. She had seen important people visit the headquarters before. Investors. Executives. Government representatives. But this was different. The atmosphere carried a sense of urgency and purpose. A senior official entered the lobby and asked one simple question. "Where is Caleb Whitmore?" The words traveled through the building faster than any announcement could have. Employees looked at each other in confusion. Caleb was the quiet cybersecurity analyst who rarely spoke during meetings. The man who carried an old coffee mug, drove an older truck, and left the office every day to pick up his daughter from school. Nobody understood why someone like him would be the person everyone was searching for. Adeline felt the weight of the moment. The same man she had called outdated was now the person others had traveled across the country to find. She remembered his calm expression when she ended his employment. She remembered waiting for an argument that never came. She remembered thinking his silence was proof that she had made the right decision. But now she wondered if she had misunderstood everything. Caleb arrived at headquarters shortly afterward. He walked through the entrance without hesitation, but without pride. He did not look around for recognition. He did not expect apologies. He simply carried the same quiet confidence he had always carried. The people around him watched carefully. Some recognized him from old records. Others only knew the rumors. But Caleb did not care about attention. He cared about solving the problem in front of him. Adeline approached him slowly. For the first time, she saw him differently. Not as an employee who failed to keep up. Not as someone who resisted change. She saw a man who had chosen humility even when he had every reason to speak louder. "Caleb," she said softly. "I did not know." He looked at her calmly. "Most people do not." That answer stayed with her. There was no anger in his voice. No desire to make her feel embarrassed. Only understanding. Caleb entered the security room and reviewed the information that had confused the entire team. The younger analysts watched as he studied the systems with patience. He did not rush. He did not criticize. He asked questions. He listened. Then he began connecting details that others had overlooked. Slowly, the room became quiet. The people who once thought his methods belonged to another era started realizing something important. Experience was not the enemy of progress. Sometimes experience was the reason progress survived. Adeline stood at the doorway, watching the man she had dismissed become the person everyone trusted. And for the first time, she understood the difference between being impressive and being truly valuable. Caleb Whitmore never needed to prove who he was. The truth had arrived before he ever had to say a word. The security room inside Mercer Dynamics had never been this quiet. The usual sounds of keyboards and conversations had disappeared, replaced by the focused silence of people watching someone work who seemed completely comfortable under pressure. Caleb Whitmore sat in front of the main system, his expression calm, his movements careful. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was not trying to remind them of his past. He was simply doing what he had always done. Finding the truth hidden beneath the surface. Around him, the younger analysts watched closely. They had spent hours reviewing the same information, searching for answers, but Caleb approached the situation differently. He did not begin with the newest technology. He began with understanding. "The problem is not what the system is showing," Caleb said quietly. "The problem is what it is hiding." The room became still. Those words carried the confidence of someone who had learned that every situation had a deeper layer. He continued asking questions, reviewing patterns, and connecting details that others had overlooked. Slowly, the confusion started becoming clear. Adeline Mercer stood nearby, watching everything unfold. She noticed something she had never noticed before. Caleb was not trying to prove that he was smarter than everyone else. He was not seeking approval. He was simply focused on protecting the people who depended on him. That realization stayed with her. For years, Adeline believed leadership meant always having the fastest answer. She believed confidence came from making bold decisions without hesitation. But Caleb showed her another kind of strength. The kind that came from patience. The kind that came from experience. The kind that did not need attention. As the hours passed, the team began following Caleb's approach. The analysts who once questioned his method started asking for his guidance. They saw that his older techniques were not outdated. They were built on principles that never became old. Careful thinking. Discipline. Responsibility. Caleb eventually identified the source of the unusual activity and created a plan to stabilize the system. The room released a quiet breath of relief. No celebration. No dramatic moment. Just the understanding that something important had been accomplished. Later, when the team stepped away, Adeline approached Caleb. You could have told everyone who you were, she said. Caleb looked toward the city lights outside the window. That was never the point. She paused. Then what was? Caleb answered softly. Doing the right thing when nobody knows your name. Those words stayed with her long after he left the room. She had spent years building a company around innovation, but she had forgotten one important lesson. Technology changes. Titles change. Opinions change. But character remains. That night, the people at Mercer Dynamics no longer saw Caleb Whitmore as the quiet analyst they had underestimated. They saw him as something much greater. A man who carried his knowledge without arrogance, his past without pride, and his responsibility without needing recognition. And for the first time, Adeline understood that the most valuable person in the room was often the one who spoke the least. The morning after everything changed at Mercer Dynamics felt different. The same glass walls reflected the same city skyline. The same employees walked through the same halls carrying coffee and checking messages. But something invisible had shifted. People no longer looked at Caleb Whitmore as the quiet analyst who sat in the corner. They looked at him with a new kind of respect. Not because of a title. Not because of a position. But because they had finally seen the character behind the silence. Caleb returned to the security department with the same calm attitude he had always carried. He answered questions, helped the younger analysts understand what he had discovered, and shared his knowledge without making anyone feel inexperienced. He never reminded them that he had been right. He never mentioned the day he was called outdated. That was not who Caleb was. He understood something many people forgot. Being respected was not about making others feel small. It was about helping others become stronger. Adeline Mercer noticed that more than anyone. She watched from a distance as Caleb treated everyone with the same patience, whether they were executives or new employees just starting their careers. It challenged everything she thought she knew about leadership. For years, she believed the strongest person in the room was the one who spoke with the most confidence. Caleb showed her that sometimes the strongest person was the one who remained calm when everyone else needed answers. Later that afternoon, Adeline found Caleb in the quiet hallway outside the security office. For a moment, she simply stood there, unsure how to begin. The woman who had once delivered his dismissal with certainty now struggled to find the right words. Caleb, she finally said. I owe you an apology. He turned toward her. His expression remained peaceful. You do not have to apologize. She looked surprised. After everything that happened, how can you say that? Caleb looked through the window toward the city below. Because people make decisions based on what they know at the time. What matters is what they choose to do after they learn the truth. Adeline was quiet. Those words reached deeper than any criticism could have. She realized Caleb was not interested in making her feel guilty. He was interested in moving forward. That was the difference between someone who wanted revenge and someone who valued redemption. Why did you never tell me who you were? She asked. Caleb gave a small smile. Because I wanted to be judged by what I did, not by a name from my past. Adeline thought about that answer for a long time. She had built her career around recognizing talent, but she had failed to recognize something more important. Human value could not always be measured by a resume, a position, or a first impression. Sometimes it was hidden in the quiet moments. In the person who stayed late to help. In the father who showed up every morning for his daughter. In the employee who accepted rejection without losing his dignity. That evening, Caleb returned home to Lily, just as he always did. He helped her finish her homework, listened to her stories, and smiled when she proudly showed him her completed project. The world had finally discovered what Caleb already knew. His greatest achievement was never the work he had done in secret. It was the person he had become when nobody was watching. Several weeks passed after the day Mercer Dynamics discovered the truth about Caleb Whitmore. The company continued to grow, but something inside its walls had changed forever. The people who once measured success by speed and status began to understand the value of patience, experience, and character. Caleb never asked for a celebration. He never requested a new title or demanded recognition for what he had done. He simply returned to the life he had always wanted. A life where mornings started with coffee at the kitchen table, where school lunches were packed before sunrise, and where his daughter Lily knew him not as a former officer or a cybersecurity expert, but simply as her father. One quiet evening, Caleb sat outside with Lily as the sun disappeared behind the neighborhood trees. She looked at him and asked a question that only a child could ask with such honesty. "Dad, were you always this good at fixing things?" Caleb smiled. He looked at the small garden they had planted together and thought about everything life had taught him. "No," he said. "I just kept learning." Lily nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. To her, it did. Children often understand what adults forget. A person's value is not found in what they own, what they control, or how many people know their name. It is found in the way they treat others when nobody is watching. Across the city, Adeline Mercer stood in her office looking at the empty desk where Caleb once worked. The space was no longer a reminder of a mistake. It had become a reminder of a lesson. She had spent years searching for the newest ideas, the fastest solutions, and the most impressive talent. But Caleb taught her something far more important. Progress without wisdom can lose direction. Innovation without humility can become arrogance. And leadership without compassion can overlook the people who matter most. She later offered Caleb a permanent leadership position at Mercer Dynamics. A role that would recognize his knowledge and allow him to guide the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. Caleb accepted, but only under one condition. "I want people to learn that experience is something to respect, not something to replace." Adeline agreed. Because she finally understood the man she had once misunderstood. Caleb Whitmore was never valuable because of his hidden past. He was valuable because of the choices he made every day. The world had seen his skills. His colleagues had discovered his expertise. But the people closest to him knew the truth long before anyone else. His greatest strength was never found in technology or titles. It was found in his quiet dignity. In his willingness to help without expecting anything back. In his ability to forgive without needing an apology. And that was the lesson everyone at Mercer Dynamics carried forward. Some people spend their lives trying to prove they matter. Others live with such honesty, kindness, and grace that eventually the world has no choice but to see them. Caleb Whitmore never needed to be the loudest voice in the room. His character spoke long before anyone else was ready to listen. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more emotional stories like this. And before you go, what state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. See you in the next story.